Buongiorno everyone, a tutti, benvenuti a tutti alle Olimpiadi delle Vendite a Freddo. I'm back. Welcome to the Cold Sales Olympics. Sorry, that was a little bit of a rough intro. I am back and we are going to be going into an awesome topic today. I hope everyone is doing amazingly. How is everyone? Jump in the chat. Tell me how you are. Tell me how things are going. Is everyone still alive? I know that we're on day 6 here, so we're in the thick of it in terms of the Winter Olympics. Apparently, for Italian TV, which I cannot figure it out at this point, they just do generic Olympic footage sometimes. So sometimes they do swimming events, even like the one in the background. So don't let that confuse you. It is the Winter Olympics. It is cold. That is all iced over at this point. So we are going to be covering an awesome topic, or at least a topic that I hear come up a lot today, which is kind of a combo topic. This is sales edgier cases. I wanted to combine a lot of kind of one-off topics that sellers run into a lot. So selling to a committee, how do you do that effectively? Competitive selling, how do I do that effectively when they're brought up or it's a rip and replace? The third one is inbound versus outbound. So how does the discovery call differentiate if this lead is coming from an inbound case scenario versus I went and vetted them outbound? Multi-threading, how do I proactively go to other people in the organization? And then ghosting, which we are, I hope we're not too familiar with, but what happens when people fall off the cliff, so to speak? Sorry, I'm really pun heavy today. What if they aren't getting back to me, of like they've already gone through a discovery call and they aren't getting back to me? What happens and what do I do then? And then the last one I'm going to cover is how to work together with an exec when an exec wants to either proactively come into the deal and they want to make they want to be a part of the call, and solution engineers. So basically, how do you pair together? I thought in my head, the pun was figure skating. They have to work as a pair and they have to be in unison as one. So how do you do the exact same thing? How do you pair together with an exec when they want to come into the deal, or you ask them to come into the deal? And then solutions engineers with the more technical people, folks on the side of the house. How do you work together with them to effectively have a great buyer journey for the buyer? So that is the topic. It is edgier cases, kind of a hodgepodge, but a very important hodgepodge. So why don't we go ahead and jump in with the first lap of the pie? I wanted to start off with a bang with how to sell to a committee. So there are more buyers than ever before in a deal, upwards of, at this point, 14 buyers in terms of just a mid-market deal. So people are including more and more people than ever before in the decision-making process. I think if I had to guess why, it's not necessarily so that everyone can have a say or an opinion or the importance of that. It's in a lot of cases to spread out the risk of how do I make sure that if I'm making a decision, we're making this as a team so I don't leave everyone out. And also, if it doesn't go that well, that we kind of have shared accountability, responsibility in the project. So when you're selling to a committee, there's really 2 cases where I see this coming up. The first case is you have gone through a discovery call with one person in specific. Maybe it's someone earlier on or lower down the decision-making channel of, like, let's say an intern or, maybe a frontline manager, and you're going into the next call at their request into a committee with several other people. Well, really there's 3 use cases. The second use case is you show up to a committee call, and there are people from a buying committee there that were there by surprise. They didn't let you know. The first buyer didn't let you know when they showed up to the call that there's more people on the line. And then the third use case is you're going into a presentation where it's known, but it's a true enterprise committee of 10, 15 people that show up on the line. You know who they are ahead of time, but it's really kind of not an RFP motion, but yeah, that so to speak. So why don't we start with the basics? What's important to selling in general is finding unknowns. That is what is going to de-risk the deal and that is what is going to increase buyer confidence that they're going to be able to solve their problem effectively and that you are the partner that they should be solving it with, and they need to have you at each step of the way. So what I mean by finding unknowns, in episode for day 2, we covered essentially discovery. And there are 2 different categories to this: a misdiagnosis and a misdiagnosis. Misdiagnosis is something the buyer believes that they are incorrect about. Let's say they think something's a root cause and it's not truly a root cause. And then the second case is a misdiagnosis, something that they missed entirely. The more that you find of these in discovery, and this is just one-on-one selling, the more valuable you are, the more value that you add, and the more the buyer, it increases buyer confidence that they're going to be able to solve it, because they found something that you found something that they didn't know. So they're completely aware that they don't know everything, but when you do that, they're more at ease that they are going to be able to solve it, because now there's one more piece of the pie, so to speak, of something that they were going to get wrong that now they know that they aren't. So every single call, every single cold email, every single cold call, every single interaction with your buyer, there's only one thing that is paramount, and that is that you find unknowns. The more that you find, the more aggressive that you find, the more hinged impacts to those, the better. The earlier on in the call that you find them, the more gravity of them, the closer the urgency of when they are going to occur, or when they would have made a mistake that may have been fatal, the better. So that is the entire exercise of selling. So when selling to a committee, the thing that's important is that you do that for the first buyer. And it's interesting because it interplays with a cause and effect relationship. If you do that for the first buyer, normally people with sellers, they are trying to limit your exposure to other people internally, because they're like, I don't want this person, this joker, going up to my boss or my boss's boss, because it's going to make me look bad. And that's essentially what I'm sent to vet out. Of like, I'm someone who's lower down the channel, so I'm sent to vet out options. And I would see that normally sellers see that as like, oh, well, this person is important. I'm like, oh, this person is the most important, meaning you can't get to these other decision makers if you don't quote unquote get through this first person. But how you get through them is not by getting through them, it's by adding value to them and finding unknowns there. And so then the cause and effect relationship that ends up happening is they proactively, and I would say probably, 90% of the cases for me personally, they proactively want to push you in front of a higher up decision maker. So any person that they put in front of the next person, the decision maker or their boss, it is a reflection on them. So they're taking that to heart of, if you didn't add any value and you're just a typical seller, they want to limit your exposure. But if you add a ton of value and you're clearly very knowledgeable and you've made their day better, they want to extend that exposure. So I would say about 90% of the time, if I've added enough value in that first call with the buyer, they're going to insist that I go to the decision maker so I can add value to them, not only to get buy-in, but also to be like, hey, look at me, who I found, because now their name is on basically the experience that they are going to have with you as a seller. So if the litmus test to that, or the first date, so to speak, is for every single call, whether there's one person, whether there's 2 people, whether there's 5 people, you need to add value by finding unknowns for them that will help them solve their problem better, whether they work with you or not, even if it doesn't have something to do with what you directly solve or sell to. If you do that, I kid you not, I cannot stress enough, they are going to push you through to multi-thread. Now, if you get on a call, like let's say that you get on the next call with the decision maker. Let's start there. In terms of that second call, my tip is, just because you've added value to the first buyer means nothing to the next buyer. It means it got you an audition and a ticket to play. But I would think through in my head that you're almost essentially starting over with that second buyer. You've got a ticket to play, you're in the room, and you've got a good word of mouth about you. But I would look at it almost as, when a new quarter starts, that your quota is back at zero, your attainment, That's essentially what you're doing in that second call. When you have an additional buyer on the line, you haven't added any value to them yet. It's really easy to confuse of like, I've added value to this first person, so I've added value to this account. But how they're seeing it is, have you added value to me? So every single call with an additional decision maker based on their metrics, which I go into very heavily in day 2, I can't stress enough to them, based on their metrics and their problems for their buyer persona, that you find an unknown for them, find a misdiagnosis or a misdiagnosis, as many as you can, and then you're following up with information that will help them be able to solve that. So that's paramount on that second call with a new buyer. If you show up to a call with multiple buyers, something I would guard against is if you have multiple buyers and some are staying on mute, I would not let that happen, meaning I would guard against for sure that people stay on mute. If you leave someone on mute, I would assume that they're going to be a detractor in the deal. Not only that they're neutral, it doesn't matter if you add value to this other person. If you can't even if you don't even take the exercise or step to get them to come off of mute, you're communicating to them that you don't know anything about what they think, know, or feel. You haven't added any value to them, and you're completely okay with that. That it's good enough to you that you just added value to this first person. It oftentimes can be someone lower down the chain, and I would say, you know, if someone's staying on mute and they're being a little bit quiet, I would come to them and I would say, let's say it's Mario, for instance. I would say, well, Mario, I can't get you to stop talking. And a lot of times they'll come off mute, and I would say, if you don't mind me asking, now I have a good grip on Cassie, you know, on Luigi. If you don't mind me asking, and shift the conversation to them. It is paramount that you get every single person on that call off mute, what they know and what they believe and why they believe it out on the floor, not only from an importance perspective, so that they feel like you're taking care of them and you value them, but also so that you add value to them, so it counteracts in their head that they're not going to be able to solve the problem. So you don't win an account by just winning a group. It's not a sum. I would think of it of you have 10 different Skittles in there, and it's how many of those Skittles do you pull over to one side. So it's like, if you get 6 Skittles, you know, over to one side of you add value, then you're going to win the whole thing. But how you win them is individually. So I view them all as individuals at the organization, all with separate metrics, separate problems, separate beliefs, separate misbeliefs. And each person, I'm coming into that call knowing that I have to get every one of them off of mute, understand what they believe, and also find a misdiagnosis, as many as you can, for that person in specific. Otherwise, I count that they're going to be a major detractor in the deal. I know I've hit the timer. One last note on this is, if you show up to the call and like, let's say a second call, the first call, it's more understandable. But if you show up to a second call and all of a sudden there's new buyers on the line and the first person didn't tell you about that, I would count it as, in my head, I'd flag it as in my head, this first person probably doesn't trust me, and I probably haven't added enough value, because if I have, they're going to start to team up with you. When you team up with them, if they're trying to solve their problem and you find something that they didn't know and you join their team of solving their problem, they're going to treat you like a teammate. They're going to share information. I've had a lot of people be like, okay, this second call is with this person. This is what they care about, blah, blah, blah. Now, they're usually incorrect, and I would never count that it's the full story. And I would never necessarily even share that with the second buyer. But just that process alone is a good litmus test that I have added value to the first person. And if I show up to a second call or a third call, the amount of information that they don't share with me is a good litmus test for how much they do or don't trust me. So if you do show up at a second call and there's a bunch of people on the line and they didn't give you a heads up beforehand, I would have a red flag in my head on how strong my relationship is with the first person. Okay, let's go into lap 2, swimming lap 2. Okay, so that is the first edge case of how to sell to a committee. The second edgier case that I wanted to go into was how to sell to inbound versus outbound, because they are different. It's brought to you by Outreach. Love the Outreach team. Also brought to you by Diet Monster. So, okay, how to sell to inbound versus outbound. There's a lot of different theories out there of one camp says they're both the same. The other camp says, basically bend over and like completely enter into their buyer journey of like, inbound, they basically want something. So just go ahead and give it to them, the information, the pricing, and sell it to them. And outbound, you have to dig for pain. I actually, not to be difficult here, but I disagree with both. So it is relevant if they're inbound versus outbound. It is very relevant. The reason that it's relevant is, and I think that the myth comes back to the misunderstanding of what selling is to begin with. So the reason that it's relevant is in the inbound case scenario, the role of a seller is to prevent as much as they can. You're like a doctor, to prevent the patient from making a mistake. That's why a doctor exists. That's why a patient can't come in and say, I want this medication, and they vend it to them. It's because they don't have the expertise that's necessary to be able to know fully. That's why it's illegal to know fully what medication I want. It's not that I don't trust you're telling the truth as a buyer. It's I don't trust the level of knowledge that you know about the topic, even though you know the knowledge internally of your organization, that you know about the topic to know what you want. And here's the semi-great news. Buyers are aware of that. The reason they self-educate so much is because they're aware that they don't know everything. They're terrified that they don't know enough to be able to solve their problem or even pick effectively what they need. And so they are having to self-educate because they don't believe that a seller knows enough and is going to be able to help them. They think they're going to be stuck by themselves. So people are doing more and more and more and more and more research than ever before. They're looking up, it is a full-blown journey, in terms of they're looking online. Hypothetically, I would think that the reason that people showed up today, other than to see what color hoodie, that Milano hoodie that I'm wearing, just kidding, no one's showing up for that. I'm showing up for that, is to learn something, hypothetically, is to learn something about solving your problem. But that is an information gather. Now, there are two types of, hypothetically, there's inbound leads, which are hand raisers, and there's postbound lead, non-hand raising marketing actions. Sometimes SDRs will reach out to those postbound, what I call postbound leads, and they'll be like, these leads are crap. And what they mean by that is it's not that the ICP or the title's wrong or the company's wrong. It's that the buyer intent's not there because they just wanted to learn about solving the problem. The reason they're learning, though, is they're scared that this problem, whatever they're running into, that it's an issue right now, but it could be a bigger issue in the future if they don't get ahead of it now. That's why they're trying to learn about it, is fear, to get ahead of that so that they can absolve it now, they can make it better now, whatever the situation is, and hopefully they can prevent running into some pain or impact in the future that's catastrophic, that they're afraid of. So that's kind of the difference there. So you have to keep in mind, from a buyer journey perspective, by the point that someone raises their hand and says, I want to talk to a seller, they have gone through hours of research statistically, and they've looked at 20 different variables of things to pursue. What is the right solution to pick when I think the problem is big enough? At the point that they raise their hand, they are self-electing that the problem is big enough at this point. The reason that is extremely relevant in selling is if your job is to catch things before they make a mistake, in the inbound case scenario, they are, think of it, there's a cliff, okay? And you're evaluating of is maybe the cliff, there's only a 5-foot drop, maybe there's a 1,000-foot drop, and the buyer is unaware in both case scenarios. And inbound, they are close to jumping off the cliff. They're closer to making a decision. They're closer to swiping the credit card. They're closer to making the final pull on what the purchase is because of the level of need that they have in their head. So they have a lot of beliefs. They have a lot of reason why they believe they should solve it. The reason that's so relevant and so important is they're about to take an action, whereas outbound, they're not, if you source them. So the impending doom of what you're trying to prevent is that when they take an action, if they take one, that it's not the incorrect one. In the inbound case scenario, they're about to take an action. That's why they're raising their hand. Outbound, they're not necessarily ready to take one. I would argue that they're not. That's why you get a lot of tire kickers. If they're just evaluating if this becomes fiery enough, what would I do about it? Outbound is less risk of them making a decision. Inbound, a higher risk of them making a decision. And salespeople, out there you're probably saying, "What do you mean by risk of making a decision?" That's great. The reason it's a risk to the right kind of seller, to a true seller, is the risk is that they're going to make the decision incorrectly. We have to have our buyers back. And what that means is preventing them from making a mistake, regardless of how big or small. But in this case scenario, I mean, they have overcome the fear of what happens, which usually there's status quo deals and indecision. Status quo is the problem isn't big enough based on what they know. Indecision is problem is big enough. They still don't make a decision anyway. And they have a lot of fear around that. Fear of it's a wrong product, fear that there's too much information, fear that of outcome uncertainty, that they're not going to actually get their outcome if they actually run the credit card. That fear is going to cause you to lose 80% of your deals. They have overcome that fear because the fear of what's going to happen to them if they don't make a decision has become so big that they have to make a decision either way. So the responsibility in that is they are closer to the cliff of making a decision. It's our job to figure out, is it the wrong one? Is it the correct decision that they're going to be making? And should they be making a decision at all? Like, should they be purchasing anything at all, given their circumstance? So to the right kind of seller, our whole role is to help the buyer by understanding what they believe, why they believe it, so that we can figure out where they were wrong and what they've missed. So inbound versus outbound, the reason I don't believe both camps, I do think that it's relevant. But in the second camp, they're like, you should totally map to the buyer's journey, meaning they're coming inbound. They just want to see pricing. They just want to see the tool. So you just need to launch into that, give them the pricing and sell it to them. And I'm like, it's the same dragon, it's the same toxic belief that my job is to sell. The reason I'm not just going to get out of the way and give them pricing and give them a demo or run discovery, whatever that is, I'm like, the reason I'm not going to do that is I'm an ethical seller. I don't believe everything that they believe. Why? Because they are wrong a lot of times. Statistically speaking, 92% of the, I've seen 90 doctors. I did a number of different studies about this, and all the doctors that I polled basically said that the lion's share of the time someone has self-diagnosed of what they believe is wrong with them, and that 90% of the time to 92% of the time that they had missed something or they were incorrect about something. That is our buyer. So I'm not just going to vend them the medication. I'm not just going to shake my responsibility and say, here's the price and I'm going to give you what you want. But they're saying what they want because they believe that they're the expert out of the two of you. They don't believe they're necessarily an expert overall, but they believe that they're the expert out of the two of you. So they're like, give me the pricing and get out of my way. Stop trying to go after my pain. I know what you're trying to do so you can anchor in pricing. But if you do know more than them, which is the whole role of the seller, if you are truly the doctor, it is unethical to not ask them questions that you're just like, here's a medication. On a side note, it is the definition of an order taker. Our job is to figure out what do they believe and why do they believe it, and what's objectively true. Maybe you're going outbound and you go outbound to someone and you find an impact they didn't know about, and all of a sudden they have buyer intent. Because you created a new problem, not because you created one that didn't exist, you found one they didn't know about. So in all this case scenario of like, if they're coming inbound, I'm keeping in my mind that they're about to pull the trigger and I need to make sure it's the right one. Outbound, it's they haven't pulled the trigger. Are they correct in doing that? I'm going to go a little bit over time in the pizza pie. The thing that I'm worried about with inbound leads is that they're about ready to take an action. Industry average conversion for outbound is 6%. Inbound is 35%, not because the seller gets better, because they have convinced themselves that they need to do something and that it's the best course of action, hypothetically, to work with you to do something about it. In the inbound case scenario, what I'm worried about and what I'm diagnosing quickly on Is the action that they're about to take the correct one? And will it help them, what they're thinking about doing, resolve the issue that they think is going to happen if they don't do it? Is that going to be effective? Is it solvable? Is it avoidable? And is it avoidable doing exactly what they think it needs to be done and with nothing else? Do they have an accurate picture and a complete picture and a completely correct picture of what they need to do to solve this problem if it's solvable? So I'm scared about the action's going to be the wrong one. Outbound, I'm scared that they're not taking an action when they should be. So maybe they've missed an impact that they think that they're all good right now, but they're actually not. So the focus is different. Is their action correct in inbound? And in outbound, is their inaction correct? Maybe they're staying still because they don't know about something that truly does exist. Both case scenarios, I need to keep that in mind of where my focus is and where my urgency is. So they are completely different in terms of the discovery. So I do believe that it's relevant, but I don't believe that you should just shake your hands and get out of the way. I'm going to say this last thing. I saw a call between two influencers, and influencer A said, well, my wife was thinking about buying a car, or she was going to buy a car, and she had done a ton of research. So she came up to the lot, and the seller was asking her a bunch of questions, and she got really, really annoyed because they were irrelevant questions. And she just wished that they would sell her the car. And she got super frustrated, and she was about to walk away. What do you believe that the seller should have done in that situation? Do you believe the seller should have asked questions, or do you believe that they should have just sold her the car? And I'll never forget this. Influencer B said, I think that they should have stopped asking questions, just sold her the car, shook their hands of it, and got out of the way. And I was like, I'm going to throw my computer out the window. Yeah, just shake your responsibility. Doesn't matter if they're correct, if she was correct. Doesn't matter if it would actually solve her problem. Doesn't matter if why. Doesn't matter if she missed anything. Doesn't matter. None of that matters to me. Why? Because I'm a seller and I'm just here to sell. That is what the training industry teaches you. But that is not what the core DNA of a valuable and true seller is. A true seller is mitigating risk for the buyer of maybe she believes she needs this car with this feature to avoid this problem, but she's completely incorrect. And if I don't care about that, or I don't even know that I should be doing that, then I agree. You shake your, it's like, I don't care if they solve their problem. I'm just going to shake my hands with it and get out of the way and sell it to them. Wow, 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 wee, wow. Okay. Lap 3. That's all I'm going to say about that before I get in trouble. Okay. Lap 3, or pizza pie 3. So now we've done inbound versus outbound and how to sell it to a committee. Okay, the third piece of pie we're going to go into here is how to sell to competitors. Brought to you again by Diet Monster. How's everyone doing out there? Y'all having fun? I'm having fun. I know it seems like I'm revved up. That means I'm having fun. So in terms of selling against the competition, on a side note, or I want to start by saying this, everyone has competitors. Everyone is convinced in their head that they are the good guy and the other competitor is the bad guy. I have sold for direct head-to-head competitors, not like one of them. I sold for competitor 1, or I led the SDR team, built the entire SDR function. And then I went to another company in between, chill, there's no drama. And then I went to their direct head-on competitor. And what stood out to me is both teams thought the other one was a bad guy. Both teams thought they were in the right. Both teams thought they had superior products. They were convinced of it. Both teams believed things about the other one that just simply put weren't true. And both teams were just characteristically, like fundamentally incorrect in their understanding about the other company. That's how we view our competitors. I think that we just get so revved up that we think they're the bad guy. Our competitors are not the bad guy. our buyers are also not the bad guy. Who's the bad guy is our prospects making a mistake. That is the bad guy. So with that in focus, it is less important, and I'm going to give some tips here. I'm not just going to say, the solution to a closer is just a good opener kind of thing. I'm not going to give you a euphemism here. But the focus of a discovery is not should they use them or us, or are we better than them, or are they better than us, or da 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 da. It's what does this person need based on the information that I gather, and what do they think that they need that they don't need? What do they think they need to solve that's not true? And what have they missed? That is the crux. So when it comes to competitive selling, you have to keep in mind there's no better and there's no worse. There's just different. So I think about it like Mario Kart. To really drill this home, people are convinced that there's objectively better and objectively worse, but it is just not true. I'm going to give you an example. I was looking for places in Milan to stay during the Olympics. And I kid you not, I was talking to my parents about it, talking to my mom about it. And I was like, you would think that and I talked to my dad about it too. I said, you would think that I am, the amount of time that I'm putting into this, that I am looking for an apartment or like a home. I probably spent 10 hours looking for places. And the reason is that what I needed was very specific. What I needed was a great place, yes, of course. Central location, of course, in terms of where they were, in terms of the event, so that I could get from location to location. But two things that were very important that I did, one of which I didn't even know about before I started searching, the other which I did, was number one, the location. I didn't realize that the Milan Olympics is the most spread out Olympics of all time. Truly. There are about 5 different sites. And so I looked up one day, I'm like, oh, I wonder if I can, in the Summer Olympics in Paris, I just ran up to the different stadiums because I was like, the traffic's too crazy and blah, blah, blah. So I just ran up there. I was all sweaty and people are like looking at me. I'm like, what? It's track and field. And so because the traffic was too nuts, I didn't want to deal with that as a variable. So I was looking up, can I run up to do the same thing in Milan? So I put on the directions, and I was like, oh, it says 3 hours and something. I must have put on how long does it take to walk there. It was how much to drive there. These locations are 3.5 hours away from each other at minimum, 5 hours and 5 minutes at maximum. And when you think about, okay, what event can I go to in the morning versus the evening versus I have to film it, do these live every day at 3, it becomes critical of that locations were in a very specific spot, and every sport is in a different location, meaning figure skating is all in Milan and so is speed skating. Skeleton and luge is always in Cortina. Bormio is men's downhill and alpine skiing. So if I want to go to alpine skiing and I want to go to figure skating, it dictated where I need to stay. So location was one, but the other one was I was looking for a location, apartment, hotel, whatever it was, that had something in the background that was clearly like I wanted kind of a rustic Italian feel, and also a TV so that I could put on the Olympics in the background. I wasn't evaluating hotel to hotel of which one's better or worse. And everyone's like, it'd be like 9.8, 4 stars, 3 stars, 2 stars. And I looked into the room, and the room, like the TV, I mean, it was uncanny. It was like beautiful room, tiny TV in the corner. And I'm like, it doesn't matter the quality of the room. There's no better. What's better for me in this case scenario is based on what I need and what problem I'm trying to solve. So a place with a TV that was in an ideal location, that where people could see it, was paramount. So if I didn't know that criteria about me, you might be talking all day long about the quality of the bed sheets and the linens or the location. Like I sacrificed staying in Duomo, which is where I wanted to stay in downtown Milan, because I liked the look and the location of the TV for this place. So I took a suboptimal location within Milan itself, so that I could have this criteria. Why? That's the problem that I needed to solve. So when I'm thinking about competitor to competitor, it's not who's better, it's who's better equipped to solve the problem that they have. And you might say, well, what's the difference? Well, the first place that you need to start before you even start talking about anything is what is the problem that they need to solve? So, kind of a quick tip here. If someone comes up to you at a conference, and I get it, like our hearts are beating fast, and they're like, how do you compare with blank? How I kind of segue the conversation. I'm like, well, before I go into a litany of things about how awful they are and how amazing we are, if you don't mind me asking, what type of problem what were you looking to solve hypothetically using either one of us? Put both of us aside. And so it refocuses the conversation where it belongs. Instead of talking about they're bad and we're good, or they're good and we're bad and how we compare, they have this feature, blah, blah, blah. Some of that might not even matter. You might be leading the slaughter of using a feature that they actually don't need. They need something else, but they didn't know that. And you don't know that because you haven't asked questions, because you haven't turned the conversation to them. So it puts the focus back on them. On a side note, it helps you sell competitively way more effectively. Why? Because they are aware at that point that you're not after your glory story or just selling, you're after helping them. But from the ethical perspective, you cannot prescribe if you haven't diagnosed first, haven't understood what do they believe and why do they believe it and what's objectively true, so I can catch both of those things. So I would always take it. I wouldn't pitch without asking questions. I just ethically wouldn't. I wouldn't competitive pitch without asking questions. I just ethically wouldn't. So I would always change the conversation onto them if it's a casual setting. Now, if you come into this situation where this is if they're evaluating you ahead of time, I wouldn't focus on the competitor. When they bring the competitor up, I cannot tell you call after call after call after call after call. When I hear it, people love when they bring up their competitors, and the prospects kind of mess with us a little bit. They're like, oh, well, we're using blank and they're not that great at blank. And you'll hear them kind of leave the conversation, and then the buyer just loses it. The seller just loses it. They just take the bait. They're like, yeah, they're awful, and we're so much better, and yeah, we can help you with the setup. I'm like, well, wait. And they know what you're doing. They know that you're trying to trash them. You're like, how bad is the pain? How long has that been going on? Well, why switch? Why switch now? I'm like, it's why solve, and what do we need to solve? And, what are the moving components of that? So when they bring up a competitor at the beginning of the call, even if it's rip and replace, my genuine suggestion, keep in mind, I would say 95% of my deals are competitive, meaning I'm selling against a competitive trainer. I would not take the bait. You need to know a lot of things on that call: business problem, tactical problem, root cause, what they believe is not true, what impact, current impact, current event trigger, future event trigger. So I would start there first. I'm going to go a little bit over the timer. I'm going to hit on the timer. I'm going to hit on either one. 2 minutes here on the back end. When they bring that up on the call at the very beginning, even if it's rip or replace. Now, keep in mind, it is important to understand, like if they say it's a certain pain, man, they were taken for, it was forever for them to, we kept reaching out with customers to customer success, and it took them forever to get back to us. I personally wouldn't take that bait. I would start with tactical problem, business problem. Well, I'd be like, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, hypothetically, whenever you first start working with them, what problem were you initially trying to solve within the organization? And I would redirect the conversation. If you can't do that, you just, want to lean in to the competitors. You just, and I understand that of like, meaning people are in stage, we grow in stages, right? I wouldn't take that bait. I think it shows to the buyer that essentially you're someone who would do that. What Sarah says about Sally says more about Sarah than Sally. And it shows them that you're more concerned with beating your competitor than helping them win, right? But if you can't do that, give me a medium of when they bring up that thing about the competitor. They're like, oh, their customer success line was awful. I would ask objective questions concerning the environment and the problem that was created and what problem they were trying to solve with the competitor in the midst. I would not focus on that competitor. So in that case scenario, I'd say, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. So if hypothetically, can you walk me through what were you reaching out to customer success about? what issue, like what were you running into? Of like, maybe they were reaching out about something that they actually didn't need to be reaching out at all. When I sold for those head-to-head competitors, I taught 10 buyers that were enterprise buyer from competitor A. They were current clients. I taught them, got on the phone when I was selling for competitor B and taught them how to use competitor A better. I know they're like, what is with this girl? She's out of her mind. Like, that's insane. But I'm like, they're trying to solve a problem. Maybe it's not in their best use case to switch. If they had just currently bought and they're running into a problem, that's a problem for them. That should hurt for you because it hurts them, right? And a lot of case scenarios, it's not the smartest to get out of the contract at that point. Like the risk and the shot would be too high. I would try to make their world better in the use case that they're in. 7 out of those 10 clients ended up switching because they're thinking, okay, you just helped me use competitor A better. You did more than their customer success team. Yeah, I'm imagining this is going through their head. Their customer success team even did. So if you know that much about them and you and this competitor B, why is she working for competitor B? But it helped build that trust of, I'm here to help you regardless of if you give me my win or not. And so that trust was long-term enough to where eventually they did switch. They're like, okay, well, you're helping us overall solve our problem more, so we're going to switch to you. So I would keep in mind, if they bring that up at the beginning of the call, I would go through it. But if you must, I'd be objective about what was the problem that they were seeing in the midst of it, and what was the problem they were trying to solve by using the you or the other company that they needed to solve out of the gate. So there's the problem that they needed to solve, and then there's a problem that can be created by the competitor. I would be interested in both of those, but more importantly, the problem that they needed to solve originally, because that's what they were buying hypothetically either one of you for. Okay. That was a big topic. Just stop talking crap about people. I'm telling you. I'm like, another one bites the dust. I hear call after call after call, and they're like, yeah, they're bad and we're better. Anywho, okay, that is the third piece of pie. Let's go into the fourth piece of pie. So this is when, where, and how to involve execs and solution engineers. So partnering is very important. How you partner with people internally. And there's 2 different use cases here. So let's start with execs. How do I say this? A lot of executives, and it comes from a good place, you have to keep in mind, they want to help. And their version of helping in their head, they think that in a lot of cases, is generally speaking, they think that it's helpful to their presence, that it shows the buyer that, big dog's on the line. That doesn't mean much. I'm going to be nice and say much. I would say arguably anything to the buyer, the actual buyer. So what does matter is, do they solve their problem? So there's some cases where an executive bullies their way into the deal. They're like, bring the big dogs on the line. And there's some cases where people are reaching out to executives to involve them in the deal. In the case where they are crashing through and they're like, hey, I need to jump on this call, I would, as much with your current buyer, you need to keep in mind you're at somewhat risk of the executive thinks in a lot of cases that they should come on the line and to bring credibility to the call and to talk all about their product, which is the fundamental misunderstanding that every other sales rep has, of like that it's all about me. So I would get ahead of this with your current buyer of, like, you need to have a relationship where basically you've added so much value that they can be completely candid with you. I would try and prep the exec as much as possible. And how I would prep them is by leading the jury, meaning leading them to, instead of saying like, oh, it's a competitive deal and this is what they're looking at, I would lead the jury, so to speak, with the data of what their problem is. So they naturally lead into that and start asking questions, more likely to ask questions than leading them down the product road. So in this case scenario, and I saw this a lot with, I would lead BDR teams, and sometimes I would see online of like, our BDR experience was great, and then it dropped off whenever it got to the AE, because I was, I was doing my job. I was doing what I was supposed to be doing, what most BD leaders are supposed to be doing, is getting in the conversation by finding unknowns for the person. And then they would go to the AE and they all start talking about products. Sometimes they didn't even watch the call. So how I led the jury in this case scenario of pass off from BDR to AE is I told the BDRs, start prepping the AEs with the data of the problem that they are finding by the details that you found in the call. The only difference between a cold call and a discovery call is basically the context, the amount of time, and the amount of pre-understanding of what they have with you about who you are. But the goal and the essentially agenda from my perspective is the same. How do I find unknowns and add value? It's just in a cold call, I got to find them faster and more quickly and bigger ones. So, their first experience is you found unknowns. So they want to continue that experience by taking the discovery call. So how I kind of led the jury is instead of prepping the AEs in the notes in the CRM with like, here are the notes on the account, or it's a competitive deal, or this is the amount of money, or this is the level of the title, I had them include notes that are almost exclusively about the problem. So since that was the information they were gobbling up, they naturally started leaning towards on the call. Well, I know that Beck mentioned, that you're talking about that you were having some issues with backup success rate, and that you had seen some server downtime in the last 6 months because of it. You'd seen two bouts of it. And so I wanted to hear more of an understanding of what's your IT infrastructure. So it started leading the jury in terms of the AE started leaning into the problem because we were supplying them with the data of in our call how it went with problem data. So you can feed someone with one thing or the other, vegetables or meat. So in this case scenario, how you can change their hypothetically behavior is by feeding them vegetables. With execs, the exact same thing. So you're bringing them in, if they're coming in, they're like, I have to do this. I would make sure that there is a big understanding between you and the buyer ahead of the call. I would also keep in the back of my mind that it's in most case scenarios, it is not valuable to them. What they want is their problem solved, and they want it solved more aggressively, holistically, and more accurately. That's what they want. They don't want a gift basket. They don't want an exec on the call. They don't want any of that stuff. That doesn't mean anything unless that exec is going to be with them side by side and helping them solve their problem. The exec, it means nothing to them. It's almost a flex and like, hey, which again, execs know a lot about the product, right? And so they naturally start talking about that sometimes because they have an inherent built-in knowledge, hypothetically, the problem. And again, this is generally speaking. So I would make sure that I have the relationship with the decision maker ahead of time. And when you're prepping that exec, if they, are mandating that they come in with problem information, like exclusively and in depth, so it naturally leads to that piece of the conversation. Proactively reaching out to an exec, I would say in most case scenarios, I'm going to get skewered for this online. I don't see the value. I think when I look at someone proactively involving an exec, I don't see something that's good, bad, wrong, or ugly. When I see that, I see a classic misunderstanding of the core fundamentals of what selling is. Selling is not about impressing. Selling is not about showing. It's not about talking, and it's not about telling. Selling is about diagnosing, right? So unless you think that this exec can diagnose better than you can, which I would say 100% of the time, that's usually what I've seen in the past is not why they're reaching out to the exec. They're reaching out to the exec because they think they have more credibility and they think that they can convince someone into buying more because they have a heavier, more understanding and they have more stature within the organization. None of that matters to your buyer. Matters to your buyer is solving their problem. With solution engineers, and I have to challenge people's understanding here. Well, solutions engineers highlights a very interesting reality. That sellers, by and large, the reason we need solution engineers is because sellers aren't experts in product. Let that sink in. They're not experts in product. So if our job is hypothetically in our head to push product, we're not the expert. So what's our expertise? Handling objections? How does that help the buyer? Our expertise should be on the buyer. So if the relationship is, I introduce this solutions exec, and this is how I see it happen a lot of times, of like, and the AE shuts up. because the engineer just starts talking about the product, or is sometimes diagnosing. But that shows you there's no point of the AE to be involved. There's no point for the AE to have a role. That should mean something, right? That should really mean something. You don't have to know aggressively about the product. You need to know a lot of statistics about the buyer. What are industry averages for them? What are the points at which it causes a problem for their metrics in specific? At solutions engineer, usually what their expertise is product. A lot of times it's buyer too, but most of the time it is product. My challenge to you is that our expertise should be the buyer. Meaning, if I don't know what the buyer's even metric on, what value am I? And I would let that sink in and take that to heart. Just because you don't know your buyers today does not mean you have to continue in that manner. Meaning tomorrow's a new day. I've made billions of mistakes. The reasons I have so much to say and I know what to, largely speak, that I'm like, don't do this, is because I've done all of it. I've aggressively made mistakes in my career. And a lot of those mistakes I'm like, I don't know the buyer. My first organization that I sold for, it was heating, lighting, cooling for governmental buildings and school districts. What did I know about HVAC? Nothing. The main problem that I have is that I left that organization. I still know nothing. And that's a shame. I wanted to quit sales because I walked out of a meeting. I'll never forget this, with a buyer. And I thought, I was in Dallas and I looked at this guy and I thought, that person, same with Alan. I was like, Alan's buying because he likes me, or we're friends, and I manipulated him there. But the problem I had is I'm like, I don't know if it's even a good idea for him to buy. I don't know. I just don't know. So focus your attention there. Our entire discovery role should be about finding the problem and updating when they believe something that's not true and finding things that they've missed. That is our expertise. At the point a solution engineer comes in, it should be based on product, but that should be supplemental to the discovery that you did by finding the problems that they did know about that were accurate and the ones that they didn't know about and that didn't know about and were inaccurate. So that is the role. So I would look at the solutions engineer as a friend and as a complement to what you do, but it certainly shouldn't supplement. I mean, I've heard the saying of like, can AI replace the SDR, or can AI replace sales? I'm like, it depends. How most of it is done, yes. But how it should be done, the whole point of the role, no. So if a solutions engineer can replace you, that means that you think that put this math through your head. If solutions engineers can replace you, it means that your entire role in your head was to talk about product, right? When our role should be about buyer and finding unknowns. Okay, let's go into pizza pie slice 6, sorry, and then we're gonna close out. So that is, we've done committee, we've done inbound versus outbound, competitors, how and when to involve execs. And the last one that I wanted to do here was when buyers, how to safely multi-thread across the org and when buyers goes. We're going to combo those two for the last lap. So I guess I had two option 6s. Okay, so let's start with how to multi-thread. So kind of like selling to a committee, a very important thing to think about is multi-threading. Buyers exist internally, more buyers than just one, whether we know it or not, and whether we like it or not. Again, 14 buyers in a enterprise deal. 14. A mid-market deal. Enterprise, I mean, it gets ridiculous. So you have to keep in mind, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, regardless of whether we know that or not, or acknowledge that or not, or have gotten the prospect to say that to us or not. There are more people that are involved. It is always important and it is to our advantage to get, and this is going to make my stomach sick to say this sentence, but hear me out. It's always to our advantage as a seller to get more people in front of more people in our head to sell. How most sellers take that is, I want to get to the decision maker because then I have more influence and then I have access to power. It's such a messed up concept. Power, like the power to quote unquote influence just makes my stomach sick. I'm like, our power, our superpower, our focus should be every single person at the org, that we help them do their job more effectively and solve their problem more so than they could before they interacted with us. So when I'm thinking of, there are multiple people internally, and a lot of people are like, I need to get to power. And I'm like, yeah, but how you get to power is you have to quote unquote prove yourself to the first person, not by talking about product. You're just proving to them that you're a normal seller and that they shouldn't introduce you to the decision maker. A lot of the cases, they are there to gatekeep you from people internally. In our head, we want to sell more products, higher price tag, and we want a lot of access to everyone who's important. We want the CEO of Coke on the line. But I'm like, come on, first of all, it's the CEO of Coke. Run that through your mind. Like, wouldn't you be embarrassed? But I'm, instead of thinking about what's good for me, I'm thinking about what's good for them. So other buyers existing internally, I'm thinking through, not do I have access to them? Have I helped those other buyers internally? Have I found unknowns for those other buyers internally? Start with the partner that you came with. If you start with, regardless of their role, you are showing to them that they're not important. And I hear these lines of like, so we can kill two birds with one stone. Is there anyone else that you want to involve? I'm like, Brendan, they know what you're doing, and you are telling them right off the jump that they're not important enough to you. That, they don't really matter. Who matters to you is the decision maker. Why? Because my goal is to sell. When if you're truly trying to help and you're truly selling effectively, then it should be, if this person's in front of me, I want to help them. And I want to help that person and help that person and help that person. Yes, I want to help the decision maker, but it's because I want to help the decision maker so they can solve the problem more effectively. I also want to help the person that is in front of me. The fastest way to blow trust is to circumvent. BYU did a number of different studies on this. You had lying, crap talking, not trusting that person. Out of all the things that could blow trust more effectively, circumventing is number one. So I cannot stress enough, you do not multi-thread by going around your first buyer. Whoever you enter with, you should not in any case scenario go around them. If you have the instinct to do that, heaven forbid you do that, I'm going to be strong in this. I think that you need to quit sales. It shows you at your fundamental core that you do not give a crap about that person in front of you. How embarrassing to them if you execute on that and you go around to someone else. I saw this a video, and I'm going to throw us always in the mud, always in the hot chair. I saw a trainer talking about this. They're like, yeah, I went around this my current buyer to go to their boss because I wasn't getting any traction with them. So I went around to their boss to let them know about the problem bowl to get them involved. And they were like, yeah. And then they like kicked me out of the deal. And so that's a bad idea. I'm like, Brendan, you didn't know that was a bad idea to begin with. Let's just talk about ethically. You know how dumb that makes them look? You need to have your buyers back in every regard. I need to find their problems. I need to find the problems they didn't know about. I need to help them enable by finding out all the things that they're going to run into that they didn't know about. If that is in your brain, blood, if even a cell of that is in your body, the last thing you would think about is going around them to their boss to hopefully get some traction there. That deal will not close. And if it does, the blood is on your hands of that person. You just rob their credibility. So it's important to have multiple people in the organization. They're going to be in the buying journey, whether you know it or not. But the reason it's important is you need to add value to those people and help enable those people too, because solving a problem is a group venture. You don't solve in isolation, certainly not in B2B. You don't solve in isolation. So the reason that I want to get a hold of those people is to help them and also help this person by helping them, by finding unknowns for them. If you can't help yourself and you're like, I want to bring it up, so we can kill two birds with one stone. I'm like, what two birds? The one doing the killing is you, not them, because that doesn't matter to them, right? The only way it matters to them is you want to keep away from them, right? But I'm like, if you have to include a line, I cannot stress this enough. Like from me to you, just from an ability perspective, but also for the buyer, it is time for us to have our buyers back. You have to ask that first person, hey, I know that you mentioned X was going to be a part of the decision, or they were going to be on the next call. I hope I don't overstep here. Would you mind if I reached out to them? I was just going to send them over a couple of things that they could look at. I know that you had mentioned X, Y, and Z. Now, again, we're going to have the conversation live, but I wanted to send over a couple of articles that they could take a look at in terms of solving this problem at large, just so they have it, either way. It shouldn't be product information. It shouldn't be about you, to help them solve their problem. But you must start with asking permission. I don't care how low they are. They're not low. And if you think that, quit sales. I mean, truly, until I'm not saying your character will, like, you're always going to be that spot. I've been in rougher spots than I am today, but I'm saying for the current moment, if that is your heart, then you've got to get out of the field, because it is time for us to help our buyers. So you have to, at minimum, if you're going to do that, you have to ask the current buyer, do you mind if I reach out to them? This is what I was going to do. And you have to send over articles of truly what would be helpful to them, not about the buying process, not about you, not about with you, Glory, about solving the problem overall. I wouldn't bring up any dirty laundry, any things that this person told you. You need to protect, this person, not from solving the problem or exposing them, but like exposing them unnecessarily. Why? Because then their boss is like, oh, this is super bad, I should fire them. So always start with the first person, start with the partner you came with, add value. They will naturally usually put the second person on the line. But if you're going to try and involve them, I would go through the first person, be very intentional, very overt. Do you mind? And then you're reaching out to the person and you're adding value that has nothing to do with you, your product, or your company. And the last thing on ghosting. When buyers ghost, it's because they don't trust you and they don't think that you've added value. One of those two reasons. And it's not necessarily they don't trust you. I've got 50 seconds. Not necessarily that they don't trust you in your ability. It's not necessarily they don't trust that you're not going to tell the truth. They don't trust in your agenda a lot of times. And they don't trust, and sorry, I'm going to just be candid. They don't trust in your maturity. Like people will say, like, can you give me feedback on why you didn't move forward with us? And then the buyer goes. Why? Because they don't want to tell you of like, oh, well, we went with competitor B or, competitor 2, because they think you're going to counter them. You're going to use it to get back in and they don't want to deal with it. And so they just ghost you. So I would take that to heart. If you're getting a lot of ghosting, it's because of something on your end, not theirs. And if you are, it is never too late to add value. So when you're reaching back out, it's not following up. Can I get an update? You said close by this date, blah, blah, and making him scared. Send a piece of value. I saw this article I thought you might like, especially on point number 3 on blah, blah. No need to respond. Just thought of it and thought you might like it. The more apropos to their situation, the better. Like the more that it helps them solve a problem, especially if they mentioned it, if like you uncovered that, the better. So the way you can unghost people is, I mean, again, the reason that they're ghosting to begin with is most of the time you haven't added value, or they don't trust you, or they don't trust you to handle the decision. The reason parents don't tell kids a lot of times, sorry, that Santa isn't real isn't because they don't trust them to tell the truth, is they don't trust that they know that they're not in this spot maturity-wise where they can handle that. That's how a lot of buyers see us, is they're just going to counter us. If I tell them they're just going to counter, and I don't want to deal with any of that. That's not my bag. The fact that they feel bad makes me feel for buyers to begin with, of like, that's none of their concern. It's not their job to regulate us or to give us updates. It's their job to solve their problem. So if I haven't been valuable in doing that ahead of time, there's no time like the present. So if nothing else, if you're going to reach out, it can't be following up, circling back, any update. You said if you didn't move it, I'm confused, blah, blah, blah. It should be, hey, I saw this article the other day. I couldn't help but think of you because I know you're talking about blank. Here's the link, especially on question number 3 on blah, blah. No need to respond. Just saw it and thought you might be able to get some use from it. That's everything. This was a hodgepodge. I hope a good hodgepodge. Hope everyone's still alive. This was the sales edgier cases. So it was 6 different edge cases, competitors involving execs, multi-threading across an org, inbound versus outbound, committee. It kind of reminds me, hopefully, of my mom's spaghetti. It's good the first day, but it's even better the second day. So even though it's hodgepodge, I hope that it was a good hodgepodge. I hope that everyone is doing well. It is February 11th. So we are really heating up in terms of the Olympics. So I got a number of different events that are coming up. Keep in mind, Friday the 13th is right around the corner. So prep for that. Yikes. And then the next day is going to be Valentine's Day. All going to be live here from Milan in the Olympics. I hope everyone is staying safe, staying above quota, staying warm, and I will see y'all on the next session where we are going to cover for, this is going to be, sorry, let me look this up. I should have looked this up beforehand. Tomorrow, stay tuned. We're going to go back to prospecting, so we're doing every other, and we're going to go into how to handle objections like budget freezes, sorry with the puns, and how to leave a great voicemail. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. And also thank you to Outreach for being the wonderful partner that they are. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you a domani. Bye. Ciao.